Welcome to Winning on Issues, where Texas politics meets strategy and implementation. I'm your host, James Dickey, former chairman of the Republican Party of Texas. When most people hear Railroad Commission, they think of trains. But if you're in business in Texas, whether you're drilling wells in the Permian, managing land in South Texas, or manufacturing technology in Austin, you know this agency is actually the heartbeat of the Texas economy. It regulates the oil and gas that powers our grid, fuels our cars, and funds our schools. It oversees the pipelines that connect our industries and the uranium mining that fuels our nuclear future. Today, we're sitting down with the man steering this critical agency, Chairman Jim Wright. A lifelong South Texan, a fifth-generation rancher, and a businessman who spent decades in the oilfield service industry before stepping into public service. Since his election in 2020, Chairman Wright has led a quiet revolution at the Commission, overhauling antiquated IT systems, securing Texas's right to permit carbon capture projects independent of federal delays, and pioneering new frameworks for geothermal energy and water recycling. We're going to discuss how the Commission is cutting red tape for operators, how it's turning oilfield waste into water resources, and what the recent victory over the EPA on carbon capture means for your bottom line. Chairman Wright, welcome to Winning on Issues.
James, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here today and a real honor. Look forward to our discussion.
As am I. You're a fifth-generation rancher, and you built a successful business. Talk about what made you make the step into regulation.
You know, I started my first company in 1991, and we've serviced a lot of different industries, refinery, utility, and of course, we discovered what we call the shale revolution in Texas. Prior to that, we really thought we didn't have any oil in Texas. It was not until fracking was invented, we started to see formations that fracking would allow us to go into to access oil that was untapped before, which has been the big revolution for Texas ever since about 2008. So naturally, my company kind of followed where the money was flowing. That money started flowing really rapidly around 2010, so we got more involved with the oil and gas industry than we had been previously. And a lot of my services, being environmental related, dealt with permitting. So going to the Commission and dealing with trying to get permits and starting to see that rules were kind of antiquated, and they weren't really being interpreted consistently. And so it was kind of frustrating. And I had really offered to come in with industry and start writing what's called guidance documents on some of the rules so that they would be administered fairly and consistent, which is imperative for our industry to survive.
Absolutely.
By the way, that wasn't well received at the time. So the task force that I'd put together to help do that kind of looked at me and said, "Why don't you consider running for railroad commissioner?" And I told them at first to go jump off the highest bridge they could find. But it was about 3 days before the deadline, and I thought, somebody's got to step up. Somebody's got to make a difference, and I really need to do that. So the rest is kind of history from there.
Well, and just those of us who care about good government, having that kind of transparency, having visibility for business to be able to know what the rules are and know why those are the rules, and for it to have there be a good reason why those are the rules. Those are all such important things. Talk about what you've done while you've been at the Commission related to all that.
My mission came here was exactly what I kind of told you, and having an environmental background, I really kind of directed in on what are we doing about protecting our environment, and what are we doing in safety regards, and how's that going to look in the future? Because what we do today in the oil and gas industry had never been done before until the discovery of the shale. So it was bringing a whole lot of new issues that I referred to as growing pains. And I felt like the environment would be a concern not just for the industry, but also for just people in general in Texas, especially landowners. So, I worked really hard. It took me 3 years to change the rule, to implement some new things that really helped us in moving through the future of keeping us ahead of our responsibility, not behind it. So I felt like we made a great milestone because that particular rule had not been changed in over 40 years.
Wow.
And a lot of people don't realize that the Railroad Commission, a lot of our stuff and what our abilities are are directed by legislative actions. So navigating a rule change really has to contemplate what are all the legislative actions that have taken place in history to make sure that we're not negative on some of those that we've been kind of mandated to do. So there was a lot that went on. There was a ton of public involvement in the rulemaking. That's probably the thing I'm most proud of, is that we got past that hurdle. Secondly, we look at, what is our future? What are we experiencing today? And I refer to them again as growing pains. And here lately, it's been mainly about, we have a lot of water that we deal with, a lot of water that comes up alongside oil and gas. So water has created some issues for us. And then we've also gotten so much public attention on what the massive industry of oil and gas is and does for Texas that we've attracted some really bad actors in theft and a lot of concerns and a lot of things going on in that industry involving theft. So those have been the two big priorities for me lately. But, during my term, flaring was also an issue, and I often said you can't condemn flaring and condemn pipelines too. You got to pick one or the other, right? So I have been a huge advocate for trying to make sure that we have the infrastructure to not waste our natural resources and get them put into a market so that it benefits our economy here in Texas. So that's been a big thing that I've been looking forward to doing, and I continue to do every day. And I can go on, but I'll let you ask another question, James.
Well, that is so important, and I want viewers to hear from you, your passion about this. It's really important. One of the things I know the Railroad Commission has done during your term is the implementation of the Lone Star system, the launching of that. Tell the listeners about that and what is and is not part of it.
Well, the Lone Star system is a system that we went out in the market and we purchased. It cost lots of money to purchase that program. We felt like it would be very important because people have to understand what the history of the Railroad Commission really was. If you wanted to come in and research, say, I want to go drill somewhere, I want to drill for oil and gas, you're going to do your research to make sure you're not just going to poke a hole in the ground and come up with nothing. So there's a lot of records. The commission was created in 1901 or 1891, and we actually drilled our first well in 1901. So you can imagine the data that we have at the commission, but all that data was pretty much paper. So, it was very hard for people to navigate through any issues that they were having with their concerns, and also in investigating of, what can I do and where can I go to be in this industry and be successful. So we put a lot of attention, and Lone Star was one of those things that resulted in that attention. Lone Star today allows everything to be more or less put into our data system, and you can go in each section, whether you want to put in a pipeline or you want to drill a well or you're hauling waste or whatever it is you're doing in the industry, there's a silo in the Lone Star system that you can go do a lot of that research on. And we're continuing to expand on that. We're working today to where we better can communicate with each one of those silos. And we've got some other programs that we're introducing into the system. I meet with IT more than I'd really like to say about these issues, but I think it's important because I feel like the more we can streamline that process, the more easier it would be for our people to operate and to do it safely and to benefit what oil and gas is for Texas.
Well, and so putting 125 years worth of records into that system, that was over 100 million records?
No, you're off just a little bit. It's actually 8 billion connection points.
Oh my God!
Yeah, it's dramatic. But I can't be really more proud of the work that we put in today. We have about 104 employees inside our IT department.
Wow.
That's really focused on, let's put this thing together. We talk all the time about how do we get each one of those issues to communicate with the other so that it's easier for people to go in, whatever their concerns or whatever they want to investigate. It's not, something that you got to sit there and really spend a lot of time to figure out. It's just a click. And that click should give you all the information that you need. That's what we're looking to try to do. And in that, my fellow Commissioner Wayne Christian says it best, it's sort of a Doge process. I think as a result of that, we'll see that maybe some of the permitting requirements is not, ambiguous as it has been. Maybe it's more of some type of a registration process, just streamlining things to where we can get more efficient.
That's absolutely a critical thing to do. And yeah, well, being transparent and having that data available, they need to drill for the data before they go drill for the oil.
Yeah, and I think it also helps alleviate and educate a lot of the public concerns that you've seen around oil and gas. That should be accessible for everybody.
Yep, absolutely. And I love that Texas government's position is taxpayers paid for this data, so it's available to the taxpayers.
You're exactly right.
That is fantastic. All this new transparency and the new availability of this data, has it helped the commission identify bad actors as well?
It's funny that you asked me that, James. I was just in a meeting this morning with IT, and we were going through some of the things that we're looking at adding to the system. And it was amazing that some of the stuff that we're finding. I think as we progress through that, and that was kind of brought on by a mandate that came through legislation this last legislative session, which was a Stop Theft Task Force that we had to stand up and we're now doing. So, I just looked at a little bit of the data this morning, and it just flies off the screen at you. So yeah, we feel like it's really going to help start to tighten up and see where we haven't paid really close attention that we need to pay more close attention to.
Yeah, that is really a wonderful goal of a government agency, to both be easier to work with for the good actors and make it so that the good actors don't have to compete against the bad.
Yeah, exactly. And I meet with people all the time. I meet with service companies all the time, and those are some of the biggest complaints I get is, you guys don't have a way of checking this, but we see it going on in the field every day. And coming from boots on the ground in the field and all the days I've been out there, kind of knew a lot of this stuff was occurring. But there is so much data that we've got to tie to one another to identify those weaknesses. It's just sometimes it gets overwhelming. But we've hired some good people into that department, people that can literally write program if we need them to. So I can tell the public in general, it's getting a lot better, and it will continue to get better. And the industry, I think, will be amazed here in just a short time period of the ease of things for them, instead of coming in on paper, applying for 1 million permits to do whatever it is they want to go out and do, to streamline that process.
Well, we jumped right in on the technology and the Lone Star, but from a bigger picture standpoint, you frequently talk about a three-legged stool of the commission's mission. Talk about that.
Yeah, I get frequently asked, what do you guys do? And I try to put it in perspective. I'll start with this. The mandate for me is to ensure our safety around those industries that we have, authority over. And then it's protection of our environment. Those two kind of go hand in hand to me. And then the third is guaranteeing the economic vitality of those industries that we regulate. And I look at people funny when I say those three, because those three never rhyme, right? Right. Two of them do, but all three of them don't. That's really a hard job if you think about it. But that's what stays on my mind constantly every day, is how do I keep both of those on a level playing field without it disrupting our economic success, but continuing to improve our safety and our environmental practices.
Well, and most people aren't aware of just how great a track record Texas has, and the Railroad Commission has played a big role in it.
The Railroad Commission is a renowned world agency. I mean, OPEC was developed after the Railroad Commission. I get a lot of people that call and say, why? Why was the Railroad Commission, besides safety, environmental, and the economic vitality? I said the Railroad Commission has a kind of an unspoken mission also. It's an agency that has 3 elected officials. Those elected officials come in to help protect the pendulum of politics swings. So as we saw recently, the Biden administration was not very high on fossil fuel. Which those are all great concerns, but you have to get reality to that. I don't see anybody being able to survive in today's world without fossil fuel. So, I think that we've got to continue to make sure that we protect those political swings, and that's a big part of the job. And then another part of that job, people say, well, how intimate are you? How do you follow things day to day? Commissioners act also like appellate judges. We have administrative law judges that hear cases, make decisions, and then make those recommendations to us. We sit there, we review those cases, and we either agree with our judges or we disagree with those judges. That's the critical side of things, but it's also those other responsibilities to make sure that we're doing the things that we just had talked about.
Well, and you're absolutely right. I am a big fan and proponent of nuclear energy and happy to work on some nuclear projects. But we just saw in this winter storm that in the Northeast, oil was 40% of the power supplied during this recent winter storm. And even in Texas, we had more than enough energy needed for this winter storm. And the major drivers of that were coal and oil and gas.
We call it reliable energy.
Exactly.
And all sources of energy, okay, but they have to be put into the market appropriately. And I think we still have some work to do in that area to make sure that people benefit. What do people want? They want reliability, and they want it at a cheap price. Those are the two things that we got to stay forefront with, and sometimes those get kind of hazed given market conditions. And if you go look back at Winter Storm Uri, and you think about what really happened during that time, we had not experienced a cold snap like that for a long, long time. And Texas grows immensely every day. There's reports that come to me that say we have 1,200 people a day moving to the state. That's not including the industry that moves to the state, like new AI data centers.
Right.
All of those require a lot of our resources. And during Winter Storm Uri, we were a growing state. One of the ERCOT decisions was that we need to shed load in order to keep up with the demand. Well, that load naturally said, where's the most sparse area in Texas? That'd be West Texas.
Right.
No problem. Let's cut the electricity out there. Well, air emissions mandates in 2007 pretty much told the oil and gas industry, look, you're going to have to pretty much electrify because you're putting emissions out with your compressors and other things that we're going to curtail that. We're going to take action for you not having the ability to do it. So a lot of our stuff is all electrical now. You can't pump gas down a pipeline without electricity anymore. And if you cut the electricity off, we got a problem. That's really what the case was during Winter Storm Uri. We took extra measures through legislative action to even go further than that. We prepared our stuff. We've done winter weather preparedness on all of our things. But the thing that was really more successful than any of that is it opened the pathway and the door for Texas agencies to start to communicate with one another. I remember getting at the commission over 5 years ago, PUC wouldn't even say good morning. We didn't talk to one another, much less shake their hand. I didn't know that was something we did. I'm friendly to everybody, so every time I looked at a person from PUC, they looked at me like I had four eyes for just saying good morning. But after Winter Storm Uri, I called the chairman then, which was Peter Lake. I said, you and I need to communicate. And we started holding weekly meetings, and we made a lot of progress. What those meetings resulted in is we took our natural gas generators and our pipeline companies, and we set them across the table from those electrical generators that are using those products to generate electricity. And we said, every time we have something interruption due to weather concerns, we're going to force you to come to this table and do that. Don't make us go down and get a law passed for it. We need you to volunteer to do it. And I can tell you, I have not seen us go without electricity since the time we've done that. It's all been based on sitting across the table from one another, discussing the issues and making sure we're addressing those up front before they become detrimental.
Well, and kudos to the legislature for all the things they did, but it's great for the listeners to know that at agencies, you guys were doing a lot of things behind the scenes. It wasn't nearly as visible as a law, but very, very important. Let's talk. You talked a lot about the Permian. We talked about electricity. We talked about the importance of oil and gas. The shale revolution has been miraculous. And it would not, very, no one or almost no one was predicting we would get to the point where we were actually exporting gas, starting less than a decade ago. And 2 decades ago, no one would have said that. That has been miraculous. Well, one of the side effects has been produced water, the water that comes up as part of the fracking process. Talk to folks about the produced water and what you guys have been doing with it.
You know, it's really important because it amazes me. A lot of people don't understand what that success is based on today. I often and always refer to that as the shale revolution. This is not the old days where we had geology and we would go out and we'd try to do seismic and exploratory measures to find pots of oil and then drill a pipe straight down to that pot and suck the oil out, and that's what we did up until that shale revolution. Well, what that shale revolution allows us to do now is we actually can take a pipe and bend it, and we drill horizontal. And that pipe now is going into formations that we never could access before because they were such hard formations. They were a rock formation. And when we drilled through that horizontally, it allowed us to start what's called a fracking process, which is just recently invented within the last 25 years, which was a great thing, but had never been applied to the horizontal drilling until the shale revolution, which now allows us to kind of break that rock open and allow oil to flow. That's what our success has been based on here lately. But the problem with that is what comes up with oil and natural gas. We have a lot of water. So on the average, we have about 5 barrels of water for every barrel of crude that comes out of the ground. Yep. If you look at what the reports say. And if you think about it, we're producing about 6 million barrels of oil every day. So the math is about 30 million barrels of water that we have to handle. What people don't realize is you can't push that water back into that same tight formation like we did in the old days. We have to put it in different formations. So for a while we were saying, okay, let's go below that formation. Let's go into a deeper injection zone, which, by the way, is just right above numerous fault lines out in West Texas. So working with the Bureau of Economic Geology and some of the arrays that we have out that measure seismicity, the data was starting to show that it was the deeper injection that was causing a lot of those earthquakes. So naturally, we set up and mandated a curtailment action. We said, look, we cannot have earthquakes. You're going to have to start injecting shallow. Well, those shallow injections now, with all the old legacy wells out there, is a potential threat to groundwater in the overpressurization. So what I'm trying to say in a very simple way is we're trying to stuff 20 ounces of water into a 12-ounce can, and it's not working out so good. Oh, and by the way, Texas has never been in a worse drought condition west of the 98th meridian than we see today. And there's 30 million barrels of water that we produce every day, and the technology has come so far today that we can get this water to even beyond drinking water standards. Oh, and now with that much water, we have a lot of precious minerals that are in it, precious minerals like lithium. So there's a need for water in Texas. We have a lot of water that we needed to have other use for. We have the technology to treat it where it's safe for either irrigation or surface water recharge or aquifer recharge. We can treat it to any level there. It is, I think, imperative that people recognize that given the conditions we have in West Texas in seismicity and overpressurization, the industry is being forced into doing other uses with this water. This is something that I noticed 4 years ago. So what that means for those that are heavy drought regions of Texas, having to go out and drill brackish water wells or get permits to desal oceanic water, that means the price of their water is going to go way up. It's going to become hard for those west of that 98th meridian to attract industry with those higher water prices in comparison to what you see in Houston or Louisiana that gets rain every day. This is an opportunity, given the conditions that we have in the oil and gas industry, to have a supply of water that helps dilute those costs to where those communities that want to keep their industry and their jobs west of the 98th now have something that they could look at, get behind, and that would benefit them not only in decreasing those drought conditions, but in helping them stay economically viable to attract industries to their communities.
Well, and to address that, there's been the creation of the Texas Produced Water Consortium. It sounds like there's a real business case there for companies to be treating and using that water.
As I said 4 years ago, when I started to recognize that, we were having, and this is part of those growing pain things. Again, you can only stuff so much water in a 12-ounce can, right? And so 4 years ago, I went to our staff and I said, I want to set up a pilot program. And let's administer a pilot program. Let's encourage these oil and gas guys out there, the midstream water guys, to start treating the water, and let's use it for irrigation in West Texas. If anybody needs water on the surface, it's West Texas. And I tell the ranchers out there frequently, I said, wouldn't it be nice to run 2 head of cows every 1,000 acres instead of 1? You would have 100% increase in your production, by helping get behind this. So I'm proud to announce today we have about 6 of those pilot projects that are working. They have done great. They've been treating the water. I've got one in particular that really kind of started the thing rolling when I brought up the idea. They invited me out to their lab. They had 9 cases of natural vegetation planted in those cases with the natural soil. And they were treating their water to different salinity levels to see which case would do the best. So that naturally they asked me, which case do you think's doing the best? I picked the case. They said, you'd be surprised. That's the one that we're treating to the highest level of salinity. I said, no, it's not really a surprise for me, because if you look at West Texas and why it's so arid, it's because that has always been high in salinity out there. So if you poured fresh water on a plant in West Texas, you'll kill it. So that's part of that process, is to looking at what do you intend to do with the water and what should those standards look like so that we get the best benefit and safety out of it.
Well, and the irony there is you'll get the best result, and it's probably the least cost because they're able to leave the maximum amount of salinity in it.
It is in some cases. In some cases, it just varies, because if you look at the Texas Water Consortium that was stood up by Senator Perry in one of his bills, they've done so much research in this, and if you look at, what's actually in produced water, it's not that demonization that it appears that people put out there. And that's not what the data is showing. These are elements that we're very familiar with. It's salt, it's minerals. The hydrocarbons, trust me, there's not an oil company going to give you an ounce of hydrocarbon because that has a value.
Yeah.
So you're really dealing with salt and minerals. Well, lithium is in very high demand. When you get that kind of volume, extraction and economics work on lithium. So how do you extract lithium out of water? You have to have some type of process that extracts the metals. Then you filter the lithium out of the metals. So now we're reducing the metal count. As far as the salt is concerned, a lot of this treatment is to the level of where you can get a return between 50 and 60% of the volume. Well, that means that I can reduce my injection volume by 50 or 60% as we continue through with what we've been trying to accomplish in Texas. So I'm very excited about produced water. I dream about it at night. I think it's going to be a huge benefit for Texas. We're working through some issues now, not only at the federal level, but with our sister agency, the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality, to set common sense guidelines to encourage reuse of this water and to provide a benefit for Texas.
Well, and there's also been an effort to actually work with industry for operator-led response plans.
Oh, yeah. That deals more with seismicity. And what we did is we've got actually 3 seismic response areas that we've seen some seismicity in. 2 of those we mandated, hey, if your wells that you're injecting or go over above some pressure limit from data that we've collected, then you'll have to shut down. You'll have to decrease your volumes. You'll have to put it in a shallower injection zone. Those we mandated. That one of the zones we had out there, we said, hey, industry, you guys are experts at this too. You come back to us with some type of lead response and tell us how to do that. So we were trying to measure, who is doing this the best. And so far, they've been on a level playing field. I've seen good results in both. So I think it's been a great effort, and we're going to continue to do that. One thing that I'm going to always strive to not happen is have the roof come down on somebody's head, or have your cows turn up in the morning and all cows got four legs in the air. That's not going to happen.
No, that would be a very, very bad
Right.
So looking ahead, we've got some new guidelines coming for the saltwater disposal well permits. How's that going?
I just spoke, just kind of mentioned that. That's part of that curtailment that led into. We've learned a lot since the shale revolution at the agency also. And BAG's been a great partner to work with in doing that. And we meet frequently with them. Well, we try to look at that data real close. Well, that data has shown that some of these formations do not diffuse that water like other formations do. And geology is different everywhere. You can go 2 miles down the highway in West Texas and be in a whole different geology than you were 2 miles where you came from. So the diffusion of that water is really being looked at in detail, which now is setting, how do you measure that? If I've got strong pressure and I'm trying to inject it, that means I got a really tight formation, so my diffusion is not very rapid. Some formations actually have a suction on them, where it'll take all the water you can give it. That's what we're getting more detail in, and that's what the new measures about permitting disposal wells is. But I'm trying to do even more. I'm doing everything I can to make midstreams and our producers really focus on, let's treat this water and let's make it a benefit for Texas, and let's make it an economic benefit for those communities that are really suffering today.
Well, it is absolutely a trend that anytime an industry can turn their waste product into a revenue source, it is a huge net positive.
Yeah, I did that too on our solid waste. I think the first 4 months I was in office, I called TxDOT and I said, you know what? I may be an idiot here, but I'm pretty sure that your asphalt has a lot of oil in it. I said, I have stuff that's got a lot of oil in it too. And I said, it's kind of fine, just like the stuff you put on our highways. Well, Commissioner, we'd love to use it. I said, you can probably get it for a little of nothing. And I know what the price of limestone is today. So, this would really, I think, help taxpayer dollars stretch a long way further. We agree with you. This is what TxDOT's response was, but we need a college to kind of do some research on it and make sure that it fits into one of our specifications. Well, working with TxDOT, we got UT to open a study on it. They're still studying it, but UT actually ended up using their money. They paid for the study, so I'm really excited about the opportunity of taking some of our stuff now, since it already has oil that has to be bought to make asphalt, and start using it in some of our asphalt systems. So I think those things are all good because it helps stretch our taxpayer dollars even more.
That's so important. Well, a good sign that you guys are doing a good job is that the legislature transferred additional authority to you, which they don't do if they aren't confident that you're doing a good job. They transferred authority for geothermal wells to the Railroad Commission, recognizing that drilling for heat looks a lot like drilling for oil. Talk about that, the permit you just issued, and what's going on with that.
Well, I think most people are familiar. The closer you get to the center of the earth, the hotter it gets. In fact, I've seen some scientists say the center of our earth is hotter than the sun. So naturally, if you're going to drill down, you're getting closer to the center. That water's hotter. So it is actually can become a thermal source for our energy. And when I say thermal source, it's back in the old days whenever we used to boil water and we'd put it into steam, and then that would run a steam engine. Kind of the same concept, which I think is great. We've had a lot of people come in and apply for that. It's another source of energy, and it's a source that, given what we're technology has led us in the ability to reach that far down and get that kind of hotter water to use, and the economics that are, it's encouraging to see that. There were other things that legislature had mandated to us, but I was really happy that they focused on something like that.
That is fantastic. Well, and for oilfield services companies that are listening, is geothermal a market they can actually go into?
It depends on where they're drilling. That temperature has to really be a certain temperature to provide that benefit. And not all formations have those temperatures that actually are conducive for that. I see it more over in the southern eastern part of Texas than I do more in the Permian. It just depends on the geology. But I do know that they have come to us. We've got people that have applied for permits for that, and they're drilling now for it. And they're also going out and looking at some of the wells that are producing water today, and they're testing that water to see what that consistency is that's being produced alongside the oil and gas. So it's a great thing.
Well, so the legislature has given you new responsibility, but the EPA even gave you more responsibility, which you don't hear that very often. They granted us, Texas Railroad Commission, primacy over Class 6 injection wells. Talk about what that is and why that matters.
A lot of the concerns, I'm not going to talk about the Biden administration. I'm going to just talk about public in general. Public in general today is concerned about greenhouse gas emissions that we have going into the atmosphere. So it was prior to the Biden administration, and this has been done in our history forever, creating some type of incentive to have people to go out and mitigate what those concerns are, greenhouse gas emissions being one of those. So what happened there is they said, okay, if you will go out and either direct air capture carbon out of the atmosphere, which they felt like was deleting some of our atmosphere that was protecting us from the earth overheating, we'll give you a tax incentive for that. We'll also allow you access to what's called a carbon credit market. So it provides a new source of revenue for those that are interested in going out and doing that. And a lot of our oil and gas producers are mapping that way forward today. And a lot of a lot of different people are trying to get into that space, because not only are they concerned about the emissions they're putting in the atmosphere, but they see the benefits in those credits that they're issued under mandates from the federal government. And I think, it provides a huge benefit for our landowners, because today we deal in something different than we did in the old days. Go out and try to buy a piece of property today and get the minerals with it. Good luck. Yeah. It's not going to happen. Hadn't been happening for a long time. So you have two different people that are kind of on the same piece of property. You got those that own the minerals that are underneath it. Then you got those that own the surface and the pore space and the water. So if you think about, where am I going to put all this carbon that I'm capturing? It's got to be put in a safe formation in a pore space. Landowners will start benefiting economically from that. It is our job at the commission, and that's one of the things that the Trump administration really recognized, is if Texas doesn't know anything, we damn sure know how to pull stuff out of the ground and put it back in the ground. So, that was a pretty easy transition once Trump got into office. And to be honest with you, in the EPA that was prior to Trump, I don't know how many discussions I had with them, but it was a huge education process. It took a long time just to explain to them what drilling is, what really happens whenever we go do this. It amazed me that they didn't really know. But with the Trump administration, that's not the case today. So the result of that was that the transition was made, that we got Class 6 injection authority, recognizing that if anybody knows how to put stuff in the ground, it's Texas.
Absolutely. Well, and regardless of the motivation for why someone wants to do carbon capture wells, if they're going to do it, to have an agency who actually understands and wants to have the permitting process go fairly and smoothly and transparently.
And safely. I used to tell the old EPA that was under the Biden administration, I said, I would hate to think that you're going to try to permit these, because you don't even know how we extract oil out of the ground. How are you going to know how to store carbon?
Back when we started the conversation, you mentioned flaring. Let's talk about that. What has happened with that? We've seen a multi-year downward trend in it. What's positive going on right now, and where do you see it going in the future?
When I came in, we were in the single digits as far as percentage, and I'm not sure about all the science behind all of this carbon stuff that we talk about. I'm old enough now to know that I've been through some really hot times when I was a young kid too. To me, it's a waste of natural resources. The natural gas market is increasing dramatically because of, our exposure to the world today. And you can see, if you just look in the European side of things, that, they really embraced what we call renewable energy. Well, they're suffering from that rapid embracement today which now they're having to buy fossil fuel energy to make sure they can heat their homes, to make sure that they can manufacture the products that they need. So the LNG market has just gone bonkers. I think that when you see a reduction in flaring, it's because that we're actually starting to recognize that that is not a waste. It is a marketable product. We see it more and more every day. And you're going to see that trend. Although we're producing the most we've ever produced in our lifetime, we're at the lowest levels of that than we've ever seen in our lifetime. We're at less than 0.5%, but we're like 5 times more than just 5 years ago. Today we're producing 36 trillion cubic feet a day of natural gas. A lot of gas.
That is. Well, and yeah, as it's a valuable byproduct and not just a problem, we can turn it into a revenue
market.
source. Yep.
And I think Texas is doing a good job. I hope that I'm doing my part to encourage that. But all of these issues and concerns that we have go away if we can get stable markets that rely on Texas and what we do in Texas and want to buy our products, which is what we're seeing more and more today.
Well, and that's a perfect segue. You've commented about the damage caused by the pause in LNG exports and the disruption of the market on that front. What are your top priorities for unlocking energy exports?
Well, I'm, again, very fortunate that we have Trump administration today. One thing I can say about Mr. Trump is, or President Trump is, he's a good businessman. He recognizes, how do we fix these issues that people have concerns in? And I often tell the people that are that criticize what our emissions are, as in flaring, and I tell them again, you can't oppose pipelines and oppose flaring. You got to pick one side or the other. And so, the impediment there has always been the infrastructure to carry our stuff to markets. And there are some issues there, but I think they're getting better today. I think Texas is starting to recognize what the benefits of being blessed with these natural resources are. You see it through just what legislation has provided in tax breaks and the things that they're doing for Texas and the new school voucher, all those great things that all this money that oil and gas is putting in the form of severance taxes is doing for this state. Today, last year, we were $27 billion. The year before, we were a little north of $27 billion, broke a record in history of just in severance tax that we're benefiting for the state. So those are all good things. And I think that everybody's concerns in all this, market is the mitigating point of that.
Absolutely. And the one downside of 125 years of amazing history is that we've also got 125 years of cumulative orphaned wells. Wells left behind when operators go bankrupt. And the commission's been pretty aggressive on that front. Tell us, I know in 2024, you plugged over 1,000 wells with state funds.
Yeah, we've done that year over year. I think we started this process in 1984. We plugged almost 50,000 wells just in state funds. But, a lot of people say, well, you're using my tax dollars to do that. We are using tax dollars, but they're tax dollars that are actually coming from the oil and gas industry. And they're basically paying for it. But what happens a lot is I personally hate that we would ever waste any of our natural resources. So, those wells are going to change hands until we can suck everything we can out of that ground. Well, it's the guy that on the end. And sometimes you just can't make that, so they file for bankruptcy, and this is a result of that. What I think we got to do a better job of is keeping that technology improving to where maybe there is some future for some of these older legacy wells that we have. And when I say that, the carbon credit market could be one of those futures. If the concern is emissions out of some of these unplugged wells, then let's dive in more into the carbon credit market and encourage people to maybe plug more wells and have the market help pay for that instead of using those tax dollars. But when I first heard about us getting funding from the federal government, I don't know if you know this story or not, but IIJA fund was something that the federal government set up and said, look, we're going to give you federal tax dollars to go out and curve emissions out of some of these unplugged wells. And the state of Texas had initially qualified for $25 million with no strings attached. We were able to plug about 730 wells with that $25 million. I mean, and we did it within 1 year, in addition to what we do in our state level. Yeah. So the second tranche came, in which we qualified for about $90 million, except this one had a lot of strings attached to it. You know, we had to go hire biologists and archaeologists, and, you know, the mission here, stated by them, is we want to stop emissions. The only way you're going to stop emissions in a well is plug the well.
Right.
So why would you going to go spend a bunch of extra money doing this? You know, I went to Washington and testified about it. I mean, it made no sense to me. If your concern is greenhouse gas emissions and you think it's coming from these orphaned wells, let's plug the wells.
Simple.
This site's already been disturbed.
Right.
That's what happened. And a lot of the vegetation that was there is not going to be there if you don't plug the well. So that was kind of my argument back to them. And also, the federal government said, well, if you use our dollars, you can't go to the carbon credit market. I said, I can't even begin to put common sense behind that one, but I think that's ignorant. So, you know, I was so passionate about that when I testified in Washington that I ended up writing an op-ed about it in Washington Times. And when Trump got elected, Doug Burgum, who now runs Department of Interior, changed the IIJA now, removed all of those red tape things that we had to go through. And when he did it, he sent out a directive, and I swear, I think he took my op-ed and cut and pasted it right into the directive. So I was really kind of proud of that, because I thought, you know, that was kind of a waste of time to go up during the Biden administration and do that, testifying on that. But now I'm very happy to see what's happened. Now we don't have that. Now we have access to that money, and we're moving ahead. But I think we've got to do a better job of looking at the future. And this last legislative session agreed with that. They came up with a bill now that they're forcing operators to come up with a plugging plan. Yeah. They're forcing operators to plug these older wells. We're in the process of generating those rules, and that's going to be a process, because we want to make sure that we do that fair and that we do it in the best way that we can that benefits us in Texas.
Absolutely. Well, these are some big issues, and not surprising. An agency that deals with such an important part of our economy is dealing with big issues. But whether it's participating in a pilot program for water recycling, or applying for a carbon storage permit, or bidding on a plugging contract, what's the one message you want those listening to take away about the Railroad Commission of Texas today?
You know, I think the biggest thing that people need to understand, number one, is I don't have anything to do with railroads. I can't do anything about the horn blowing at 2 a.m. coming through your city on a train. I've told legislation before, when I go down there and we talk about all these issues when they're thinking about making these bills, is I really wish you'd give me a little bit more funding, because I think it's very, very important for us to educate the people in Texas. What is the Railroad Commission, and what does it do for me? Because we don't. And I'm going to continue that fight to make sure that we can really get that message out. Tell people that the Railroad Commission is your biggest economic benefit that you have in this state. We employ over 500,000 people that pay the highest jobs that we pay in the state. And they say, well, 500,000 is not a lot of people. But you don't realize those 500,000 people buy the food at the restaurant. They rent your hotel rooms. They buy your cars. They buy your boats. They buy your houses. It's all in the circle of making our economy what it is today. If you took that piece out of our economy, Texas would be more looking like a New York than it would Texas. So, you know, I think it's important for people to know how this agency drives that, and what we do to maintain it. And go back to the three things I said in the beginning. Our concerns, as is everybody's concerns, should be making sure we're doing it safe, making sure that we are staying ahead of and mitigating anything that we're doing to our environment, and also making sure that we're ensuring the economic success and vitality of those industries that bring all these great things for us here in Texas.
Well, I can't think of anything better to end on than that. Chairman, thank you very much.
James, thank you. And it's a wonderful to see you again. I really appreciate it. It's an honor being here with you, and I wish you great success. I think this will be very informative for the people here in Texas.